Hi everyone, welcome to BIM Like a Boss, episode 4, Unifi features your boss will love. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Today we will walk you through some time and money saving feature demonstrations that will give you the information you need to help your firm move towards better BIM management. We will be taking you through a side-by-side demo of average BIM content workflows with and without the help of Unifi products. We will show you tips and tricks on how to impress the boss that doesn't use Revit, keep your national BIM manager on track, help your local model manager stay organized, and beyond. If you have any questions that come up throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A tool in the top left-hand corner of your Zoom window to ask. We will answer your questions at the end of our 30-minute demo. I'm pleased to announce Unifi's very own BIM specialist, Jay Merlon, as our host today. Without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to Jay to get things started. Jay, take it away.
Thanks, Laura, and hello, everyone. So in this episode, like Laura mentioned, I'm going to show you some features that we think your boss or bosses will love. There are really many different types of quote-unquote bosses in our industry, and in this webinar, we'll just try to impress at least a few of these different types of higher-ups. Hopefully by the end of this webinar, you and your boss will have even more reasons to implement Unifi as an integral part of your daily grind. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into this live demo. So first and foremost, let's start at the top. Well, who is at the top? Well, I think at most firms, we would consider the folks at the top to be someone in the position of, say, project executive or project manager. And in general, maybe it's just someone who typically is leading a project but has no desire to work in Revit or even open a Revit model. So in this example, we'll try to impress these folks. And maybe your firm has a senior level engineer who is not involved in Revit, but they're the brains driving the design intent and consulting with clients. So it makes sense for them not to have to need to jump into Revit, but they do still need to be involved with the model somehow. And Revit, since it produces their drawing sets, they are ultimately accountable and liable for these drawing sets. So they do need to be involved somewhat. But how do we keep them engaged with the status of their project without having them open the Revit model? Because again, they most likely don't want to. Okay, so let's jump into Sheets as an example. So maybe your boss is curious about the status of their project and they look at a sheet list as an indicator of how far along their project is. It's because the more sheets in the drawing set, the more progress the team has made, which makes sense most of the time. So here in Revit, we would need to go to, let's say, a sheet list as a schedule. Now, the conventional way of sending your boss a sheet list would be to open the model, navigate to the sheet schedule, and then export it to Excel. So I'd go down here and export it as a schedule. Now, actually, it's not an Excel file. It's a text file, which is a CSV. So you might even need to format it in Excel once you export it. But once you send this off to your boss, you're actually disconnecting the data set from the model. So in my opinion, we really should be striving to move away from data exchanges like this on a live project, because really once it's exported, the data is dead, because in other words, it has the potential to be outdated the moment you export anything from BIM. So how can your boss have a live and current view of the project sheets? Well, we just rolled out a feature called Project Analytics that can actually help with this. So for those that aren't familiar with Project Analytics, I'll just give you a brief introduction. Unifi now has the ability to collect and display data from your Revit projects automatically. So one of the best parts of this tool is once your company admins opt in per model, we'll be able to gather the data from any user that has the Unifi core application installed. And the data is collected in the background and is completely undetectable by the end user. So every time a user syncs to Central, the data is collected. And this means you don't have to run any scripts or schedule any tasks to be run from a server to collect this data, because again, by going that route, the data can actually be outdated as soon as that task is run. So in an effort to stay on topic, I won't be able to show you all of the useful data that we're collecting here. I just want to jump straight into how your boss can use this tool to review the status of their Revit projects. But if you are interested in learning more about Project Analytics, definitely reach out to us and we'd be happy to show you all more. So here, let me go ahead and jump into a specific model. I'll get into the architectural model. And I would like to show you how your boss can review contents of a Revit model without ever having to open Revit. And here in the content tab, I'll show you some examples. So let's go off of the sheet example. So if we can continue that, rather than having a sheet list exported into Excel or a CSV from Revit, you can now have a live view of all of the sheets that live in that Revit model currently, and you can view them directly in a web browser, again, without ever having to open Revit. And also keep in mind that this is not exported data. There's no graph from Dynamo that has been run, and this data is updated every time a user syncs. So your boss will never be looking at outdated information. So that's sheets. And then let's also look at, maybe your boss would like to look at room data. So again, if I flip back over to Revit, the conventional way to view room data is through a schedule like so, and then I'd have to go through the same sort of process of exporting to a text file, which again is a risk of having outdated information at some point. So here in project analytics, under the content tab, we also give you the ability to view room data directly here in your web browser. So again, think about that project executive or project manager or senior team member who does not want to open Revit, but really needs to see what's going on in these models. Now they can do so and have a live view of what's happening in their project directly from their web browser. Also, revisions is a good one to mention in terms of project progress. So let's say you're in a construction administration phase and you have a project manager that, again, doesn't want to open Revit, but they need to see where the model is at in terms of RFIs. Here they have that visibility. They can actually see it from a web browser without opening Revit. And even drafting views, we're able to show you drafting views in your web browser. Drafting views may or may not contain details that can give you a sign of the progress during the construction documentation phase. So if I was a PM looking at this, I might say, oh, we're in the CD phase and I'd like to see much more details added to this project. So we really have a ton of features that I'd love to share project analytics, but it's really out of the scope of this webinar. But again, if you'd like to learn more, definitely reach out to us and we'll share some of the amazing new features. So as far as impressing your boss that doesn't like to or can't use Revit, I hope that giving them the ability to review some of these project contents will help them stay involved with the live Revit model. And again, without ever having to open Revit. So let's go ahead and move on to point number 2 I'd like to make, and it is actually content requests. So this feature should impress a boss that might be at a national or regional BIM manager position, someone who needs to manage multiple offices or disciplines, because tracking progress of creating BIM content like Revit families can be difficult when your team isn't all in the same office. So let's just say your boss manages a group of power users who are experts at developing BIM content. Maybe there's a BIM specialist or production group, or maybe you're the BIM manager at a smaller firm who's the sole creator of all things BIM. So how do you typically manage requests to build content? So without a formal system in place, you're probably receiving requests like this via email or maybe even Skype. And worst case scenario, someone stops by your desk or gives you a call and verbally requests the content, which makes it even harder to track. And aside from when the request is initiated, how do you track those requests? I mean, we're all multitaskers here. We have a lot on our plate. It's just the nature of our industry. So you probably need to use some sort of a spreadsheet to track these requests. And this process definitely works. There's nothing technically wrong with it. But if you've ever managed a log like this, you know that it can be a task in itself to keep up to date. Well, now I'm going to show you how we handle this in Unifi. So right here in the Unifi application, we have a built-in form that allows your users to request content. But it's much more than just a form that's submitted via email. The content request becomes its own entity, so to speak. You can actually track status and collaborate with your team to complete, and I will show you that here shortly. But right here at the top of the form, you can see that there are some optional fields like project number and name, just in case you need to track your time spent building this content and build to a specific project. Pretty straightforward stuff like due date and priority. But down here, where you can specify the library, and this can be considered a time saver as well, because once this content has been created and this request is fulfilled, you can attach it to this request, and whatever your requester chooses here for selected libraries, that content will automatically be added to the library or libraries that are specified here. So again, whoever's creating the content, maybe it's your boss, they don't need to figure out where to upload the content. They won't even need to upload the content manually because it's added to these libraries automatically. Down here, pretty straightforward fields again. So instructions, you can specify some detailed instructions on the content to be created. But I like to point out here, when you're developing an Autodesk Revit family, we do give your requester the requirement to specify the Revit year, because obviously Revit is not backwards compatible. So we want to make sure that your team is reminded that they need to specify the appropriate year for whoever is building the content so that it's compatible. Down here, we also give you the ability to attach cut sheets to the request itself. So here I can drag and drop, and you can see that this PDF is now attached to this content request. So this could be a napkin sketch, or it could be an AutoCAD drawing that helps whoever's fulfilling this request to actually model the content. And so there's one more feature that I'd like to show you here on content request, and I'll jump over to a content request that's in progress. So if I click on Whirlpool Spa here. So down here, we've got the attached documents like I spoke about earlier, but down here we've got an entire discussion board. So now discussions can happen directly in the content request itself. So again, it's best practice to keep all of your information in one place. So this type of collaborative discussion can actually prove to be as valuable as the documentation itself. Because without a platform like this, discussions would typically happen over email or chat, and that doesn't do the team any good because the conversations will be buried in other team members' inboxes. But by having the discussions directly attached to the content request, we can actually see what decisions were made and why, and best of all, these discussions will always be available and visible for posterity. And now let's just say that this content request has been completed. You'd simply mark it complete. And then again, the content is automatically added to the library that was specified by the requester. So now think about your current process. How is your boss tracking requests like this? And if you need to figure out how a piece of content came to be, how would they figure that out? How much time would they need to spend tracking down this type of information and history? So if your boss is that BIM manager who needs to manage requests for their team to create content, I hope that this helps them realize the value of having all of the information in one place on one platform here in Unifi. The last feature that I'll share actually seems like an easy one, and maybe this one necessarily isn't for your boss, but it's more for your local model manager or even a local BIM manager, or even a national BIM manager. I want to give you an example of how Unifi makes it easier to organize Revit families, because organizing Revit families is really only half the battle. Really, the other half is making it easy for your team to find them. So users need to load families into a Revit project. The first challenge they're faced with is finding the content they're looking for. And without a content management system, this can be really difficult, mostly because Windows has no visibility of the BIM data within these families, which means you're stuck sifting through folders within subfolders. And now I'll quickly demonstrate some of the pitfalls of that type of workflow where you're using a file folder structure to store these massive BIM libraries. So what you're seeing here on the screen is a standard Revit 2018 library provided by Autodesk. And I'm just going to use this as an example. But families seem to be sorted by model category for the most part. But here you can actually see that there are some discipline folders in here. So this is typical to sort of have an ad hoc or unorganized folder structure and make it really difficult for users to find. Now, if I look at these electrical, mechanical, and plumbing folders, again, it's a discipline sort of mixed in with model categories. So again, that can be really confusing for your users. So let's say I wanted to find a roof drain. Maybe first I would look for a drain folder. I don't see that, but I know that it's a piece of plumbing item, so I'll jump into the plumbing folder. But here now I'm confronted with architectural and MEP, which is a little confusing as well. So let's say I'm on the architecture side, so I'll just jump straight into architectural. Now equipment and fixtures is a subfolder. I'll drill down into fixtures because I know plumbing fixtures, roof drains are a plumbing fixture in Revit. So I'll drill down here, and then again, another subfolder here to find the drains. But here's the sad part is that now there's only one family and it says it's a 2D family. And I don't want that. I want a 3D family. So really now I'm gonna have to go back up to the plumbing folder, and really I should have probably clicked on the MEP folder to start with. So this, I want to show you this as an example because this is something that your users will typically go through when you're using a file folder structure. So again, here I'm in fixtures, drains, this all looks really familiar. So I'm starting to get the hang of how this folder is organized. And now I can find the roof drain that I've been hunting for. And from here, I can just drag and drop it into my Revit project. Now, another example of more of a conventional way to find content would be to use the Windows search function. So if I jump back to my main library, the Windows search function does work, but it's only really helpful if you know the family name or the file name. So here I'll type in roof drain. Again, easy to find because that family just happens to be named roof drain, so I know exactly what to type in there. But what if you're trying to find something else, something that maybe is more parametric in nature? Like let's just use a queen bed, for example. I can type in queen bed and try to search for that. No items match that search. So maybe I need to reduce the query and just type in queen. No items again, but maybe I'll just go even more broad and type in bed. And all right, here's my content. Now, I know for sure that at least a few of these families have a family type that is queen bed size, but as you can see here, Windows has no visibility of the Revit family type names, which is why the search didn't return any results when I was searching for queen. And when you're dealing with parametric families, you rarely want all of your types listed in the family name. That's just not realistic. So at this point, I can start to open these up and start to hunt and peck for any of these families that might have a queen bed in them. So that particular one has no queen bed. Maybe this family has a queen bed in it. I'd have to open up and look through here, and I don't see the queen bed type that I'm looking for. Let's see if this particular family. Yes, so this family that I finally found actually has a queen bed in it. So as you can see here as an example of that conventional method of trying to find families and content, really using this file folder structure can be quite time consuming. So now let's see what it looks like to find content in Unifi Core. So here, I'm going to go ahead and jump straight into the search functionality. And I'll just use the same example, roof drain. So that was an easy one because even Windows could find it this way. But let's just use this family as an example. So have a look at some of the metadata that you're seeing here. This roof drain can, in Unifi, it can live in multiple libraries and multiple tags. So if you think back to my previous example with the file folder structure, I had to decide between architectural or MEP folders. And right here and now, I can actually have this particular content live in multiple places. So that's just not possible with the file folder system unless you duplicate that file. Also check out the tags below because you can actually get creative and allow your users to sort by, say, CSI code, or you can even create your own subcategories, like if you wanted to categorize it by system, like rainwater. But here's where the search functionality gets really powerful in Unifi Core. So remember the queen bed example I gave from earlier. But let's challenge our system a little more and try an MEP specific search. So let's say I wanted to find a 30,000 BTU air handling unit. So here in Unifi, I can actually type in 30,000 BTU. And again, that search result does not have 30,000 BTU in the family name because it's parametric. Maybe it's got some different family types. So if I click on the details of this family, you can actually see that this particular family was returned because the type name has 30,000 BTU in the type name. So maybe you can start to strategize and your boss can start to figure out their family type structure, because now that you're in Unifi and have broken away from that file folder system, you can now search by type name. And one more quick example, I'll go back to the queen bed example, which I love to give. If I search for queen bed, here's a queen bed that I was looking for. And now with one click, I can actually download that family from the cloud. Oh, I better switch over to my project. Let's try that one more time. With one click, I can download it from the cloud, and I'm actually loading the family into my project with one click. And let's just say you drove your bed to work today and you're parking in the lot here. Okay, so now start to think about the time you can save from that example. So not only is it easier to find the content, not only is it easier to find the content in Unifi, but it's also easier to download it from the cloud, insert it into your project, and use it. So for those of you that are stuck using the file folder structure for your Revit families, start paying attention to how long it takes you to find families within these complex folder structures. Maybe you could even calculate an ROI, and then you can give that to your BIM manager to demonstrate how much time can be saved when you're using Unifi. And that actually wrapped things up for the presentation piece of this episode. And I hope that some of these features can help impress your boss at any level in your firm or organization, whether they're a project executive or project manager or national BIM manager, or even a local model manager. So now I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor back over to Laura so she can walk us through the Q&A session.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jay, for that informative demo. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, you're welcome to use the Q&A tool in the top left-hand corner of your Zoom window to submit questions. And it looks like we've already had several come through, so let's get to those. The first question for you, Jay, is we are starting with Unifi next month. Do you have any startup tips?
Yes, so launching Unifi at your firm is a great question. Obviously, it's the first step. So one of the best tips I can probably give is, I had a webinar on this a few months back, and it really has to do with getting the content into the platform, so Unifi Core, and just getting visibility over it, and using it as sort of this kind of sandbox library where you can, like a testing ground, where you can, throw the content in there, and then part of what we do in Unifi is actually revisions. So revisioning content is all visible once you get it into the platform. So that's just one example, and I'll just quickly show you on the screen here, since I know of a good example here. This television you're seeing, maybe this, I'd uploaded it and I said, hey, this is a first draft. Let's start looking at how we can fix it. And then you've got your team of people that now can revise the family and even add notes as to what they changed. So again, this, in my opinion, if you can create this sort of controlled sandbox environment to start to vet content, this can be a platform to actually become that QA tool. So to more specifically answer the question, probably the first steps I would say, don't hold back on having the perfect library before you bring it into Unifi, because Unifi can be that platform that helps you perfect the library.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next question is, tell us more about the project analytics feature.
Sure. Yeah. Project. So again, I didn't really want to dive in too deep on this this feature, but basically, project analytics, I mentioned it earlier. We're gathering data every time a user syncs. There is no script to run or graph to run on a scheduled basis, but we're gathering things like critical Revit warnings, We can give your projects a health score based on how you configure those warnings, like what do you consider a critical warning versus a non-critical warning. We're also managing and monitoring your sync times versus file size. So as your file size starts to jump up, you can start to diagnose if there was any sort of network connectivity issues, or why did this file size jump up. In my opinion, one of the most powerful features here that I didn't go over during the webinar, but I'll quickly show you here, is comparing changes. So now with every user's sync, you are able to see what changed within the model with every user's sync. So maybe this is a good example. Revisions, I can see that. It looks like it loaded a little slow. It looks like this particular user, it was me, I added 109 sheets and deleted 3. And it's showing that I'm actually able to see this in terms of data, like what exactly did I do during these syncs. So this is something really powerful that I didn't get a chance to show during the webinar.
Perfect. And on that same note, I want to add that throughout the presentation, we added some links to the Zoom group chat regarding project analytics. So the top one is for you to actually sign up for a demo directly. And then also there's a video of a previous demo we conducted if you are interested in more information. And we had another question that also came in regarding the project analytics pricing. Has Unifi announced the pricing for project analytics yet?
Oh, that's a great question. Definitely outside of my expertise, I would say. So we will have to get back to the asker about that one.
Okay, perfect. The next question is also regarding project analytics. In project analytics, you said project managers can see drafting views in a web browser. Can the project manager see the actual drafting views or just a list of what drafting views are in the project?
Great question. So currently, I will say that you can only see the drafting views in the project. We're showing some just fundamental information like the element ID, the discipline, and the name. But it's worth noting that we are in version 1. So any of these types of requests are taken fairly seriously, and we'd like to create this feature to be as robust as our users need it to be. But I will say that in the in Unifi Core itself, we can preview drafting views. So I know this is aside from project analytics, but it's worth noting that you can have a nice high-res view of a drafting view directly here in Unifi Core.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. The next question, is there a way to directly search family types in Unifi?
Yep, absolutely. So when you do a search, I use the BTU example. But if you wanted to search, so again, if I wanted to find a queen bed, really this is the family type name. So if I wasn't clear enough, these are the family types that are sort of in this tabbed interface. And this is actually the family type name. So when I was searching for this queen, it's actually returning that result because it has a queen family type name.
Okay, thank you. The next question for you, Jay. Do you have any tips for quality control for BIM managers?
Yes, quality control is an excellent topic, and actually project analytics helps out with that a lot, in my opinion. So if I jump back over to project analytics and I go over to, let's say, the MEP model this time, and I go back into content and then jump over here to families. So quality control has, obviously it's a very complex term and very broad. There's a lot to quality control, but I think that families within projects have a lot to do with quality control. So you can see here that this particular MEP model that I'm viewing the content of, actually, I can see that several of these families are not sourced from Unifi. So that right then and there, you know that this particular model has just a ton of content that wasn't vetted or approved by our firm. But let's jump and filter by just only the Unifi families. So this is all content that came from our library, but now you're seeing an interesting piece of data here because you can now tell if a family is outdated or not. So here you can see Unifi revision in model. This is the version of the family in the Revit project. And this current Unifi revision number 3, this is the version that lives in your library. So now as a BIM manager, maybe I'm even a BIM manager that's not directly related to this project, but I happen to know that this Titus family had a pretty significant update. I can say, okay, maybe I need to notify whoever's working on this project that they might want to consider upgrading. So that's a good example, I think, of just quality control, and again, not having to open these models because you now have visibility of them through a web browser.
Thank you, Jay. Our next question, will Unifi search any parameters within a family?
So that is probably one of the most requested features that I hear. And currently, unfortunately, we do not support that, but I do know that it's in the works. I can't give a definite date on when it will be rolled out, but it's definitely one of the highest requested features, and I see value in that. So hopefully we'll roll that out soon.
Excellent, thank you. The next question, how do you manage a project family? If we need to make an edit, a unique edit for the project, is there a way to be notified if the family was updated?
Okay, so this is sort of in line with what I was just referring to. There isn't necessarily a notification in place, I will say not yet. But again, notifications and reports are also on the feature list for project analytics. So I'm not sure if and when they will actually be rolled out. But if you wanted to take that extra step and just open up this project and view the contents and families from here, you can identify yourself that, hey, this is an outdated family, or this is an outdated family.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is regarding this webinar being recorded. Yes, I will go ahead and answer this one for you. This is being recorded, and we will send this out to you tomorrow. So no worries if you missed part of it. This will be coming out to you tomorrow. And then the next question I'll hand off to you, Jay. I don't think this is a function, but can there be project libraries so you can have walls, floors, roofs, view templates, and Unifi? So if a wall changes in one of the 5 files for a project, the project library can be updated and then pushed to other files.
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, the closest thing you would really have there is really pinning libraries to projects. So if I go to this demo project, and again, I don't know if I fully understand the question, but you can actually pin libraries to a project now. So if I were to pin a library here, and then I'm working within one of the models in this project, basically what would happen there is as I have Unifi open and associated with that project, I would default to that library whenever I'm doing a search. So that sounds like that might answer one part of the question, but updating and pushing to other files, currently that would be more of a manual process. You would just need to, if the other files that the asker is referring to as like a container project, you would just simply need to edit the container project and then re-upload it, and then you can track it that way.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question, is it possible to save families in an older Revit version? For example, families from a Revit 2019 project save as a Revit 2018 version.
Unfortunately, that is much more of a Revit limitation than anything. Without that backwards compatibility, there really is no way to save a version of a family back to a previous version. That's why we always recommend to, say, upload your versions of your content in the earliest version possible. That way, we actually automatically push out to new versions in the cloud here, as you can see on my screen for this example. This particular family was uploaded in 2016, and then our system automatically upgraded it to future versions. So to answer the question, unfortunately, no, there's no way to go backwards, but just always try to work in as early of a version as you need to, and then that way you're future-proofing that family.
Perfect. Okay, the next question that came in. How do we leverage VR in a fast-paced design schedule to engage our clients?
Interesting question, a little off topic, but still we can try to answer that here today. So we actually covered this, some of this in our last webinar with Simon Manning and Logan from Bevel. And, a lot of what they had referred to was it really does start from the content side. So with your Revit model, having those parameters that you can sort of export and manipulate, whether you're using Unity or Unreal or even Enscape, having those materials and parameters that VR needs. It's from what they explain, and again, they're more of the experts here than I am, but from what they explain, it sounds like doing more of that work on the Revit side, with parameters and materials is smarter because, with that question, a fast-paced environment, the design environment, there's iterative processes and revisions. You always want to do the work in the design model and then use that sort of VR environment as just a deliverable of sorts, right? And just another way to view your model. So again, I think that any way that you can do the work directly in Revit in terms of content, having those associated parameters and materials will just help that iterative process, because that VR environment just becomes another way to view the model. I will also mention that there are some great tools out there like Enscape, and I think Iris will also do it, but Enscape, I believe, has a live VR environment. So basically you can view your model in VR while you're making changes to the design model. So that might be something that the asker could look into.
Perfect. And then thanks for recapping that, Jay. I also put in the chat a link to the recording for the Integrating VR and BIM webinar we had a couple of weeks back. So feel free to check that out. That will give you some great information you need. Let's get to the next question here. Does creating an older version of Revit hinder our options for later families? For example, you don't have options for tooltips in 2014, but it's introduced in Revit 2016. Do we miss out on some functionality?
So that's a great question. There are several features that get rolled out with every year, and I believe that's the reason that they don't, Autodesk doesn't support backwards compatibility. It's interesting because we just had this conversation internally here at Unifi. We have a client that is looking to move from 2014 as their standard base file and move into 2017. So there are a number of compatibilities that, there's a number of new features that are built in for these new versions. So one that I personally know about right off the top of my head is there's a new data type for shared parameters in 2017. It's HVAC, temperature difference. That one will actually, if you try to add that shared parameter in to an earlier version, it will actually break your shared parameters file or make it unreadable by an older version of Revit. Also, I'll just read, I have the list right in front of me. So there's parameter order adjustments. So I guess previously in earlier versions of Revit, you couldn't order family parameters, but now you can. There's rendering options. There's more enhanced energy analysis and parameters. And even if you're way back in 2014, I guess we didn't have tooltips for family parameters. So there really are a handful of improvements that are made with every year. So I think the rule of thumb that we usually follow, or I personally follow, is 2 years back. So if we've got like Revit 2019 now, that is, maybe it's not the standard, but maybe you go back to 2016 because we're in 2018. That's usually the route that I'll take when figuring out what version of Revit to be my based content version.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The next question, I think we covered this in a previous question, but maybe we can just reiterate for the asker. What is the family format currently used for Revit, and how do we get around backward compatibility?
Right, so we kind of covered this a little bit earlier, and really there is no backwards compatibility, unfortunately. You really even would have, you wouldn't be able to copy and paste extrusions from a later version in Revit to an earlier version. So again, I would just say, highly recommend to strategize, just think ahead and decide, okay, I really need, maybe you need a Revit 2015 version. I know here at Unifi, we do build content in 2015 just to kind of support as early as possible.
Excellent, thank you. The next question, can users have their own personal library or just complete for the company?
It is actually an overall company library, but there is a feature here that I can show off, and you can have personal saved searches as a user. So here, if you're looking at saved searches, there's two tabs here. There's the company saved searches, which are shared amongst your entire organization, and then there's your personal saved searches. So now what saved searches are, I'll get into this a little bit. You can actually predefine search queries. So if you wanted, let's say, your own personal library of doors, you can actually mark them all as favorites. And then anytime you do a search for that criteria, I don't think I have this actually fully set up right now because I don't have any favorite doors. But you would sort of treat it like your own library. I mean, it's not really because other users can see the content within these searches. But at least it gives you another granular way of searching for things and organizing things the way that you see fit.
Wonderful. And it looks like those are all of our questions for today. And thank you so much to our audience for submitting those and engaging with us. And thank you, Jay, for taking the time to ask. As I mentioned during our Q&A, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar to all of you who joined us later on. And with that, we'll also include a link to a short survey. Our goal is to ensure these webinars are worthwhile to you. So if you'd be willing to take a couple of minutes to share your feedback, we'd greatly appreciate it. And thank you again so much, everyone, for your time today. We look forward to having you at our next webinar, which will take place 2 weeks from today on Wednesday, December 19th. And we will be getting insight from several BIM managers on how to get approval and buy-in from the higher ups on a BIM content management system. We'll send out the invite for this to you early next week, and we hope to see you there. Thanks again so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.